The night they broke her was supposed to be the most beautiful night of her life. 18 years old, full moon rising over the Ashvale Mountains, like a wound in the sky, red and swollen and bleeding light across the peaks. The awakening ceremony only happened once in a generation, when the young wolves of Ironmore Pack came of age and stood before the moonstone to receive the name of their fated mate. Girls wore white, boys wore silver. The elders lit sacred fire along the cliff's edge, and the whole pack gathered in their finest, faces tilted upward, eyes bright with expectation. Sophia Voss had waited her entire life for this night. She stood at the back of the crowd, her white dress borrowed, too large at the shoulders, pinned at the back with a copper brooch, her dark hair loose around her face because she'd had no one to braid it. She was the Omega girl, the packless one, daughter of a disgraced she-wolf who had died when Sophia was 6, leaving her to be raised on the charity of the pack's lower households. She had no rank, no inheritance, no title. What she had was quiet, a stillness inside her that the other girls called emptiness and the elders called broken. But she had felt the pull for months, a deep, magnetic ache that began in her sternum and moved outward every time he walked into a room. Kieran Voss, no relation, the name a cruel coincidence. The alpha heir of Ironmore, 19 years old, broad-shouldered, with silver eyes that caught the moon like mirrors. He was magnificent in the way that mountains were magnificent. Cold, enormous, beautiful from a distance. She had never spoken to him, but the pull had been unmistakable. She had known, the way all wolves knew before the stone confirmed it, that the moon goddess had chosen them for each other. She was wrong about many things that night, but she was not wrong about that. When Kieran's name was called to the stone, the crowd hushed. He walked forward in his silver ceremonial coat, chin raised, every inch of him radiating the power that would one day rule their pack. The elder pressed his palm to the moonstone, and the light that bloomed was gold, brilliant, rare, the color that meant the bond was strong. Sophia's heart cracked open with joy. The elder read the name from the stone's surface, where it glowed in the old language. She watched the elder's lips move, watched Kieran's face transform, first into shock, then into something colder. Disgust. He turned, found her in the crowd with those mirror eyes, and the look he gave her was the look a man gives a mistake. Then he spoke, loudly, deliberately, in front of every man, woman, and child in Ironmore Pack. I, Kieran Ashvale, heir to the Ironmore throne, reject you, Sophia Voss, as my fated mate. You are nothing. You come from nothing, and I will not be bound to nothing. The silence that followed was the loudest sound she had ever heard. And then, one by one, the people she had grown up beside began to laugh. Pain, when it is truly profound, does not announce itself. It does not crash through you like a wave. It seeps. It moves through the body the way cold moves through stone, slowly, completely, until there is nothing left that it has not touched. Sophia stood in the middle of that circle of laughter and felt herself go very still. The moonstone's light dimmed. The elder quickly moved on to the next name, nervous, avoiding her eyes. The girls who had tolerated her presence all these years turned away first, then the boys, then the families. One woman, the wife of the pack's blacksmith, who had occasionally given Sophia bread, met her eyes with something approaching pity, but even she looked away. Only one person moved toward her, Mira, 17 years old, small and fierce, with ink-stained fingers and a wolf that had not yet shifted. She pushed through the crowd and grabbed Sophia's hand and held on. "Don't cry," Mira said quietly. "Not here. Don't give them the tears." Sophia didn't cry. She stood straight. She breathed. She let the laughter wash over her and through her, and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, "I will remember this." But the night was not finished with her. An hour later, when the ceremony had ended, and the fires were dying, and the pack had retreated inside to celebrate the matches made, 3 of Kieran's inner circle found her alone at the cliff's edge. They were drunk on elderberry wine, and the permission that had been granted by their alpha's open contempt. They told her things. About her mother. About what her mother had supposedly done to deserve her fate. About how Sophia herself was stained, cursed, unworthy of pack bonds, unworthy of a mate, unworthy of the Ironmore name. Then the largest of them, a boy named Dex, who would one day become Beta, shoved her. She fell 3 feet onto a lower ledge, hit her shoulder on the rock, and lay in the dark listening to them walk away. She lay there for a long time. When she finally stood, something had changed inside her. Not broken, though it felt that way. Something older than grief. Something the pack had not put there and could not take away. She climbed back up. She walked to the small room that had been allocated to her in the pack's east house. She packed what she owned, which was very little. A journal, her mother's locket, a change of clothes, the copper brooch. Mira found her in the doorway. "Where are you going?" Mira asked. "Away." "Sarah, come with me or stay," Sophia said. "But I'm not spending another night in a place that laughed." Mira was quiet for a moment. Then she went inside and got her own bag. They walked out of Ironmore Pack in the small hours of the morning, while the fires still burned and the music still played. No one came to stop them. No one noticed. Why would they? She was nothing, after all. That was what Kieran had said. He had no idea what nothing could become. The years that followed were not kind. But kindness, Sophia would later say, was overrated. Survival was better. The first winter nearly killed them both. They made it as far as the border market town of Grayfen before their coin ran out and the cold set in. Mira had skills Sophia didn't. A sharp mind for numbers, an eye for plants, a memory that retained every healing recipe she'd ever heard. She found work with an herbalist. Sophia found work in the market, carrying crates, cleaning stalls, anything that paid. They shared a room above a tannery that smelled like death, and charged them 3 copper pieces a week. It was the best Sophia had ever slept in her life. Because it was hers. Not charity, not tolerance, hers. She learned things in Grayfen that Ironmore had never taught her. She learned that pack hierarchy meant very little outside pack borders. That an Omega girl with strong hands and a quiet voice could earn a decent living if she was willing to do the work no one else wanted. She learned that there were other packs, dozens of them, ranging from the merchant collectives of the southern flatlands to the warrior clans of the frozen north. She learned, from an old woman in the market who smelled of cedar smoke and something ancient, that not all power lived on the surface. The old woman's name was Thessaly. She ran a stall that sold what she called memory stones, smooth river rocks engraved with old symbols that she claimed could channel the moon's energy. Most people thought she was eccentric. Sophia was drawn to her stall like water to a drain. "You have something in you," Thessaly told her, the 3rd time Sophia lingered. "Everyone says I have nothing," Sophia replied. Thessaly's eyes, which were the cloudy gray of old ice, sharpened. "Everyone is wrong. Sit down, girl." What followed was not a reading exactly. It was more like an excavation. Thessaly held Sophia's hands and went very quiet, and after several minutes she made a sound low in her throat, something between surprise and recognition. "Your mother," Thessaly said carefully. "What do you know of her bloodline?" "Nothing. She never spoke of it." "Her name?" "Ilara. Ilara Voss." Thessaly was quiet for a long time. Then, "The Voss name was given to her, not born. Do you understand the difference?" Sophia did not, but she was beginning to. "Your mother ran from something," Thessaly said. "Something that would have made her, and you, very inconvenient to a great many powerful people." "What was she running from?" Thessaly looked at her with those old, clouded eyes. "The question isn't what she was running from, child. The question is what she was carrying." Then she pressed a smooth stone into Sophia's palm, unmarked, pale, warm as skin, and refused to say another word. Sophia kept the stone. She kept it, and she worked, and she grew, and she learned. In Grafen, she picked up basic wound tending from Mira's herbalist employer. In the next town, Caldwell, where they moved when Mira got a better offer from a physician, she learned how to fight. Not the formal training of pack warriors. Something rougher and more honest. The kind taught in the back of taverns by veterans who'd lost their ranks and kept their skills. Her teacher was a woman named Bryn, who had 3 scars across her jaw and eyes like a hawk, and absolutely no patience for self-pity. "You're slow," Bryn told her the first session. "I know." "You flinch." "I know. You're going to get killed." "Not if you teach me not to." Bryn looked at her for a long moment, then smiled, the kind of smile that was mostly teeth. "Fair enough," she said. "Start again." Sophia trained every morning for 2 years. Rain, snow, heat. It didn't matter. She trained until the flinching stopped, until her hands were fast and her feet were faster, until the wolf inside her, which had been curled up in fear for so long, began to slowly uncurl. She hadn't shifted yet, unusual for her age, another thing Ironmore had mocked her for, but she could feel the wolf now, present, patient, waiting. She was 21 when it finally happened. A full moon night in Caldwell, Mira asleep upstairs, Sophia sitting alone in the small yard behind their rented house, turning Thessaly's stone over in her fingers. The moon rose full and enormous over the rooftops, and something inside her, something old and immense, simply woke up. The shift, when it came, was not painful. That surprised her. Every wolf she'd ever heard describe it said it was agony, bones reshaping, skin splitting, the body fighting its own transformation. Hers was not like that. Hers was like stepping through a doorway, natural, easy. Her wolf was large. That also surprised her. Omegas ran small, she knew this. But the wolf that stood in that yard was not small. It was deep black, nearly 6 feet at the shoulder, with silver tipping every hair and eyes that glowed a deep, brilliant violet. Violet. She had never heard of a wolf with violet eyes. She stood in that yard under the full moon for a long time, trembling slightly, staring at her own reflection in the rain barrel, wondering what she was. She didn't know yet, but something told her that Thessaly's stone was connected to the answer. Minor twist number 1. Mira came downstairs and saw the wolf, and she was not afraid. She looked at Sophia, at the enormous black wolf with the violet eyes, and she said, with complete calm, "I was wondering when you were going to do that." I've known since Grayfin. What do you mean, you've known? Your mother was a Nightvale wolf, Sarah. My grandmother told me stories. I wasn't sure. I didn't want to get your hopes up. But those eyes. There's no mistaking those eyes. What is a Nightvale wolf? Mira sat down on the step. Her face was complicated. Joy and worry braided together. Tell me, Sophia said. I will, Mira said. But you're not going to like some of it. The Nightvale were old. Older than Ironmore. Older than the modern pack system. Older than most of the traditions that governed werewolf society. They were the original bloodline. The first wolves the moon goddess had created. The ones she'd given the deepest connection to the lunar power. They weren't larger or faster than other wolves by nature. But they had something other wolves didn't. They could feel the moon's will directly. Not just the instinctual pull of the full moon, but the actual intent behind the goddess's movements. They were, in the old texts, described as her hands. They were also, according to those same texts, extinct. 3 centuries ago, a coalition of Alpha Kings had ordered the Nightvale bloodline purged. Not because the Nightvale were dangerous, though they were, but because they were inconvenient. Because a bloodline that could speak directly to the moon goddess's power threatened the authority of every alpha on the continent. The purge had been systematic and brutal. The few who survived had run, changed their names, hidden their wolves. Sophia Voss had been running. And Sophia was what she'd been carrying. She sat with this for a long time. The weight of it was immense. The grief of her mother's life, the danger of her own, the staggering scope of what she'd unknowingly survived. They'll come for me, she said finally, when they find out. If they find out, Mira said. When? Secrets like this don't stay secret forever. Mira was quiet. Then, so what do we do? Sophia looked at the stone in her palm. It was warm. It was always warm. And she thought of Thessaly in Grayfin, with her clouded eyes and her knowing smile. The question isn't what she was running from, child. The question is what she was carrying. We stop running, Sophia said. She was 22 when she arrived in Valthorn. Valthorn was the largest neutral city on the continent. Not a pack territory, but a free zone that operated under the Council of Five, a governing body made up of representatives from the 5 largest pack alliances. It was a city of politics and commerce and secrets, where every powerful family had a foothold, and every conversation was a negotiation. It was also, crucially, the city where the Continental Alpha Summit was held every 3 years. The next summit was in 3 years' time. Sophia intended to be there. But first she needed resources, connections, a name that meant something. She and Mira had accumulated modest savings, enough to rent a small apartment in the commercial district. Sophia used her fighting skills to secure a position as a security contractor for one of Valethorn's merchant houses. Reputable, well-connected, neutral in the pack politics. Within 6 months, she was leading a small team. Within a year, she was the head of their security division. She was 23, and she was learning what power actually looked like from the inside. It looked like information. She began collecting it, carefully, systematically, the way Mira collected herbs. Who owed whom? Which pack families had dark histories? Which alliances were cracks waiting to split? She kept meticulous records in her journal, written in a cipher she and Mira had invented together. She also began training with Thessaly's stone. It hadn't been obvious at first, how to use it, what it was for. But now that her wolf was awake, and her bloodline knowledge was growing, She could feel the stone responding to her. When she held it during the full moon, the warmth intensified into something almost burning. She could feel the lunar energy moving through her like a current, not wild or uncontrolled, but purposeful. She began practicing with it, the way she practiced with a blade, daily, deliberately, with patience. 3 months after arriving in Valethorn, a man appeared at the door of her merchant house's offices, well-dressed, silver-haired, carrying himself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He introduced himself as Lysander Kale, senior advisor to the Northern Lycan King's court. He said he had been looking for her for 2 years. "Why?" she asked. "Because someone described your wolf to me," he said, "and I needed to confirm it was real." She kept her expression neutral. And you are very much real, Sophia Voss." He set a leather folder on the desk between them. "I think it's time we had a conversation about your family." She sat back. "My mother had no family." "Your mother had no living family," he corrected. "That's different. But families leave things behind. Records, estates, claims." He opened the folder. Inside was a document written in the old language, stamped with a seal she recognized from her studies. A crescent moon, bisected by a blade. The royal seal of the Night Vale bloodline. Her hands were perfectly still. "Where did you get this?" "From the Night Vale archives," he said. "Which were thought destroyed." "They were not. They were hidden, by a Night Vale elder, in the vaults beneath the northern mountains." He paused. "Along with a great deal of other documentation, including the original lineage records." She looked at the document. Her mother's name was on it, and above her mother's name, a name she didn't recognize. "Who is that?" she asked. Lysander's expression was careful, measured, as if he knew the weight of what he was about to say. "Your grandmother," he said. "Queen Seraphiel of the Night Vale Kingdom, the last ruling queen before the Purge." He paused again. "The archives include her final testament, written the night before the Purge began. She placed her bloodline under the moon goddess's protection, and named her daughter, your mother, as the heir to the Night Vale throne. Which means you, as your mother's only surviving child." "No," Sophia said, "are the rightful queen of the Night Vale." Silence. Then she said again, more quietly, "No. I understand this is—" "You don't," she said. "You don't understand anything about this." She stood. "Get out of my office." He left. But he left the folder. She didn't sleep that night. She sat with the stone and the document and her mother's locket, which she opened for the first time in years, and found inside a tiny photograph of a woman she'd never seen, and on the back, in her mother's handwriting, "For when it's time. I'm sorry I couldn't stay. Forgive me." She wept for the first time since Ironmore. Not for herself, for her mother, for the weight Alara had carried alone, and never once set down long enough to breathe. "Okay," she whispered to the empty room. "Okay, Mama, I'll carry it now." She was 24 when the first Alpha noticed her. She had not been hiding exactly, but she had not been visible either. But the merchant house's reputation was growing, and Sophia's role in that growth was not invisible to those who paid attention. At a Commerce Council meeting she attended in her employer's place, she spoke twice, once to correct a factual error in a trade proposal, once to point out a clause that would have bound the city's neutral merchants to unfavorable pack tariffs. Both times, the room went quiet. Both times, people turned to look at her with the expression of people recalibrating. Afterward, A man waited for her in the corridor. Tall, dark-haired, with the particular bearing that distinguished pack royalty from ordinary wolves, that sense of controlled power, of a predator choosing to hold still. Alpha Darien Coldhaven, of the Grey Wing Pack, one of the 5 most powerful alphas on the continent. "You dismantled Lord Harwick's proposal in 17 words, he said. 16, she said. He stared at her for a moment. Then he smiled. Not the cold, calculated smile of a politician, but something genuine and surprised, like a man who hasn't been caught off guard in years. "I'd like to buy you dinner," he said. "I don't eat with alphas," she said. "That's an unusual policy." "I have unusual reasons." She walked away. He let her. But 3 days later, there were flowers at her office. Not romantic flowers. Working flowers. Mountain herbs in a clay pot. With a note that said simply, "Dinner is off the table. Lunch is neutral territory. Darien Coldhaven." She laughed. Genuinely. Unexpectedly. Mira, who was visiting, stared at her. "What?" Sophia said. "I haven't heard you laugh like that since we were 17, Mira said. She looked at the flowers. He's persistent. He's powerful. And he clearly has taste. Mira paused. He's also, for the record, not mated. Mira? I'm just noting facts. She had lunch with him, then dinner. Then, over the following months, a dozen more meetings that were not quite professional, and not quite personal, and were entirely different from anything she'd experienced before. Darien was sharp in the way that good leaders were sharp, not aggressive, but precise. He read people the way she read documents. He had grown up in a pack that valued strategy over dominance, and it showed in every interaction. He also, she noticed, never pushed, never pressed, never leaned on his alpha authority to steer a conversation. He simply showed up, offered, and let her choose. She found herself choosing him more often than she expected. She didn't tell him about the Nightvale bloodline. She didn't tell him about the archives, or Lysander, or the document with her grandmother's seal, but she came closer to telling him than she'd come with anyone except Mira. She came close, but the summit was approaching, and she had work to do, and she was not yet ready to be seen. She would be, soon. She was 25 when everything came to a head. The Continental Alpha Summit convened in Valethorn every 3 years, and the one that opened on the first day of the frost season was the most politically charged in 2 decades. 3 of the 5 pack alliances were in dispute over territorial expansion into the unclaimed Ashvale Highlands, the same mountains that loomed over Ironmore. The Council of 5 was split, the neutral merchants were nervous, and every alpha worth the title had arrived in Valethorn with a retinue, an agenda, and very sharp teeth. Sophia arrived with Mira, Lysander Kale, a small security team, and 3 years of carefully assembled intelligence on every major player in the room. She also arrived wearing a color she had never worn before. Not white, not the gray of a working woman. Black, deep, pure black, with silver edging at the collar and cuffs, and at her throat, her mother's locket. The moment she walked into the summit's opening reception, she felt the shift in the room. Not everyone noticed her immediately. She was still nominally a Merchant House Security Director, a guest list footnote. But the people who did noticed her completely, with the particular attention of wolves registering something that didn't match their expectations. Darien Coldhaven found her within 10 minutes. He was in full alpha regalia, the dark blue coat of Greywing, silver rank markings at his collar, and he looked at her the way he always looked at her, as if she were a problem he found genuinely interesting. "You look different tonight," he said. "I feel different tonight." "Good different or dangerous different?" She smiled. "Ask me tomorrow." He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once, a small, deliberate nod, and let her go. She moved through the room, collecting information, making small connections, placing herself in the sightlines of people who needed to see her before the summit's real work began. She was building something tonight, carefully, the way you built a fire in wind, sheltering the spark, feeding it slowly, waiting for the moment when it caught. Then Kieran Ashvale walked in. She had known he would be here. She had prepared for it. She had practiced her own face in the mirror, the expression she would wear, the posture she would hold, the exact temperature of her voice if he spoke to her. But knowing and experiencing were different things. He was 26 now, alpha of Ironmore, his father having passed the mantle 2 years prior. He had grown into his power completely, broader, harder, with the kind of authority that came not from youth, but from actually leading a pack through difficult years. She had heard reports. Ironmore had prospered under him. He was, by most accounts, a capable and respected alpha. He had also, according to Lysander's intelligence, recently ended his 3rd serious courtship without a mating bond, without a fated mate who'd accepted him, because she had not accepted him. The bond didn't disappear with a rejection, it starved. It went quiet and cold and painful, like a wound that never quite healed. He had felt it for 7 years. She knew this because she had felt it too, that phantom ache, that occasional pull toward the north that she ruthlessly suppressed. The moon goddess's bond didn't break, but it could be denied. He saw her across the room. She watched it happen in real time, the moment his silver eyes found her, and something in his face changed, rapidly, through several emotions: confusion, recognition, the sharp intake of breath that was involuntary, biological, the faded bond waking up like a slap. Then his eyes tracked her properly, the dress, the posture, the room paying attention to her, and confusion settled into something more complicated. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned away. The first day of the summit was ceremonial. Introductions, formal seating arrangements, the reading of the council charter. Sophia sat in the merchant block, technically an observer, not a delegate, and took notes. The second day was when things began to move. The territorial dispute came to the floor. 3 alliances argued, the Council of 5 struggled to moderate, and by mid-afternoon, it was clear that without a significant concession from at least one party, the summit would collapse into open conflict. Packs had gone to war over less than this. In the merchant gallery, Sophia watched and waited. Then Lysander, seated beside her, leaned over and said quietly, "It's time." She nodded, set down her pen, stood. Several people looked up. The room's attention was not instantaneous. She was, after all, nominally a merchant's representative, but it shifted as she walked to the floor. There was something about her movement that demanded notice. That had always been true. She simply hadn't used it before. She requested the floor. The council chair, slightly startled, granted it. She was technically entitled as an observer with commercial standing. She spoke for 12 minutes. She laid out the territorial dispute in terms that bypassed pack politics entirely, reframing it as a resource access question with a mathematical solution. She proposed a shared custodianship model for the Ashevale Highlands, with revenue distribution tied to border distances and trade routes, governed by the neutral Valethorn Council rather than any individual pack authority. It was elegant, it was practical, it gave every party something. She had been building this proposal for 18 months. When she finished, the room was silent for a full 10 seconds. Then, Darian Coldhaven began to clap, a slow, deliberate, alpha-signaling applause, and one by one, the room followed. Except Kieran Ashevale, who was staring at her with an expression she had never seen on a human face. It took her a moment to identify it. Awe. The proposal was taken under formal consideration. In the corridor afterward, she was surrounded. Delegates, advisors, merchants, pack representatives all wanting her attention. She gave it professionally, graciously, keeping her eyes moving, tracking the room, managing the conversations with the same precision she managed security details. It was Mira who appeared at her elbow, low-voiced, when the crowd had thinned. He's been standing at the corridor entrance for 20 minutes. She didn't have to ask who. Let him stand, she said. Sarah, he can wait. 7 years is nothing compared to a lifetime. She paused. Is Lysander in position? Yes. The document is filed with the council registry. It becomes public record at midnight. She closed her eyes for one breath, let it out slowly. Then tonight, she said. She was standing on the summit's observation terrace, looking out over Valethorn's lit skyline, when he found her. She heard him coming. She'd always been able to hear him, that particular footfall, that contained energy that preceded his presence, the way thunder preceded lightning. Sophia. She didn't turn. Alpha Ashevale. He stopped beside her, not too close, not close enough to crowd or pressure. She noticed that. He had learned something, it seemed, about respect for space. You're extraordinary, he said. Not a compliment exactly, a statement. The tone of a man confronting something he should have known years ago and didn't. Yes, she agreed simply. I am. He flinched slightly. She saw it in her peripheral vision. I owe you. You owe me nothing, she said. I don't collect debts from people who meant nothing to me. That landed. She watched him absorb it. I was 18, he said. I was terrible, she said calmly. You were terrible, and you had a crowd and you chose to perform your rejection in front of every person you both knew. That's not a mistake, Kieran. That's a choice. You chose public humiliation because it served you. Silence. I know, he said quietly. She turned to look at him then. She let herself actually look at this man who had broken her at 18 and had no idea what he'd started. What happened after you left? He asked, something raw in his voice. I survived, she said, and then I thrived, and none of it had anything to do with you. He looked at her hands, at the stone she was turning over in her fingers, the way she always did when she was thinking. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. The bond, recognizing what it was connected to. The bond still. He started. Don't, she said. I feel it every day, he said. I have felt it every day for 7 years. It doesn't. I know, she said. I feel it too. She met his eyes. That changes nothing about what you did. He looked as if she'd struck him. Good. She turned back to the skyline. Go back to your delegation, Alpha Ashevale. Tomorrow is going to be a very full day. He stood there a moment longer. Then he left. She breathed out. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not quiet, but it would do. She turned the stone over once more. It was burning warm tonight, warmer than she'd ever felt it. The moon, full and enormous over Valethorn, was the same red-wounded color it had been on the night of her awakening. 7 years later, full circle. She was ready. Midnight arrived. The document was filed. The announcement went out to every summit delegate through the council's formal communication channels. A simple notification that new historical evidence had been entered into the public record, to be reviewed at tomorrow's formal session. By 2 in the morning, half the summit's attendees were awake. By 4, every major PAC delegation had been briefed by their intelligence staff. By dawn, Valethorn was humming like a struck bell. The Night Vale bloodline was not extinct. The rightful queen of the Night Vale stood in the city, and she had just rewritten the territorial dispute solution in front of every alpha on the continent. Sophia was awake when the first knock came at her door. She was dressed and ready. She had been ready for hours. The delegate who knocked was from the Council of Five, a formal summons to an emergency session. She accepted it with a nod and sent him away. The second knock was Darian Coldhaven. She opened the door. He stood in the corridor, not in his formal coat, in shirt sleeves, his hair slightly disordered, and his face was the face of a man who had spent the night revising everything he thought he knew. "You're a queen," he said. "Apparently. You knew. When we met, you already knew. I was still deciding what to do about it." He studied her. "Why tell me now? Why tonight?" "Because this city needed something to talk about, besides a territorial dispute," she said mildly. "And because I am tired of being invisible." She looked at him steadily. "And because I thought you deserved to know before everyone else did." Something moved across his face. That same genuine, surprised quality she'd first noticed in the corridor at the Commerce Council. As if she kept catching him off guard in ways he found entirely too enjoyable. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "Of course," she said. "I'm not an idiot." She paused. "Are you going to stand in the doorway or come in?" He came in. Mira, who was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and the composure of someone who had known all along, gave him a serene nod. They sat together, the three of them, and Sophia laid out what came next, what she intended, what she needed, what she was willing to ask for, and what she was not. Darian listened without interrupting. At the end, he said, "Greywing Pack stands with you, formally, whatever comes." She met his eyes, held them. "Thank you," she said, quietly, genuinely. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "The council session is in 3 hours, and at least 2 of the 5 members are going to fight this with everything they have." "I know," she said. "I've been planning for that too." The emergency council session was not, technically, public. But in a city where every wall had ears, it was public within minutes. The 5 council members sat at the semicircular dais. Sophia sat across from them, alone. She had specifically declined to bring advisors or PAC representatives, a choice that had puzzled people until they realized what it communicated. She didn't need them. The document was read into the formal record. The lineage was verified by the council's own archivists against 3 independent historical sources. The stamp of the Night Vale royal house was confirmed authentic by a specialist who had spent 40 years studying pre-purge artifacts. Then the council member who had clearly spent the night preparing arguments, Lord Casimir Hale, representative of the Eastern Alliance, a man with cold eyes and a jaw like a cliff edge, leaned forward. The Night Vale bloodline was lawfully dissolved by the Treaty of Ashford 3 centuries ago, he said. This document may confirm lineage. It does not confirm a throne. The Treaty of Ashford was signed under duress by parties who had no legitimate authority to dissolve a sovereign bloodline, Sophia said calmly. I have documentation of this in the archive materials. Would you like me to walk the council through it, or shall I give you the summary? Hale's jaw tightened. You can't simply walk into a council session and claim a kingdom. I'm not claiming a kingdom, she said. I'm claiming a seat. The Night Vale were signatories to the original Continental Charter, the document that established this council. Their seat was never filled after the purge. It was held vacant, pending the resolution of the bloodline question. She paused. The bloodline question is now resolved. Silence. One of the other council members, a woman named Asha Travan, who represented the Southern merchant pacts, and whom Sophia had spent considerable effort cultivating over the past year, said carefully, if the Night Vale seat is reinstated, the Council of 5 becomes the Council of 6. Yes, Sophia said, with the Night Vale casting vote belonging to the bloodline representative. She looked at Hale, which would break the current deadlock on the Ashvale territorial dispute, incidentally. More silence. She let it sit. Silence, she had learned, was a tool like any other. Document in the archive was not the only one. There was a second document, one that Lysander had kept back until this moment, produced now by one of the council's own archivists, who stood and announced that additional materials from the Night Vale archive had been delivered to the council's secure vault the previous evening. The second document was a contract, signed by the ancestors of 3 of the 5 current pack alliances, acknowledging the illegality of the purge, promising, in the formal language of ancient pack law, that if the Night Vale bloodline were ever discovered to survive, the signatory alliances would be bound to support reinstatement. 3 of the 5 alliances, which was a majority. Lord Hale's face went the color of old ash. That document is real, said the archivist quietly. I've confirmed it. Sophia sat very still. She did not smile. She did not triumph. She simply waited for the mathematics to do its work. It didn't take long. By the end of the session, the Night Vale seat had been provisionally reinstated, pending formal verification proceedings. Sophia had been granted temporary observer status on the council until those proceedings concluded. She walked out of the session into a corridor full of waiting wolves and humans, all of them staring. Mira was there, bouncing slightly on her heels, in a way she'd been doing since they were teenagers. Well? Mira said. It started, Sophia said, but not everyone was pleased. Major twist number 2 arrived 3 days later, in the form of a name she hadn't expected. Beta Dex Harmon of Ironmore, Kieran's right hand, the man who had shoved her off the cliff ledge on the night of the awakening ceremony, and whom she had never forgotten. He was not in Valethorn as part of Ironmore's official delegation. He had arrived quietly, unannounced, and had spent 2 days meeting with Lord Hale's people and 2 other pack representatives who had reasons to be threatened by a reinstated Night Vale seat. Lysander brought her this intelligence on the morning of the 4th day. What are they planning? She asked. We don't know completely, Lysander said, but there are 2 possibilities. The first is a legal challenge. They contest the lineage documentation, tie it up in procedural delays, prevent the seat from being filled before the summit ends. And the second? Lysander's expression was careful. The Night Vale Queen has not yet formally shifted in public, has not yet demonstrated the wolf. The Continental Charter requires any bloodline claim to be confirmed by what the old texts call the lunar proof, a witnessed shift under the full moon, with the bloodline's unique markings displayed. She understood immediately. They're going to argue the lunar proof hasn't been given. They're going to argue it should be given now, in front of the full summit, with their own specialists present to verify or dispute the result. A trap, she said. A potential one. If there's any ambiguity about your wolf, any way to argue that what they see is not definitively Night Vale. There's no ambiguity, she said. I know, but if they introduce enough doubt, enough procedural confusion, then let them try, she said. Schedule the lunar proof for the full moon. I'll give them exactly what they're asking for. Lysander stared at her. You're sure? She thought of the yard behind the house in Caldwell, the rain barrel, the enormous black wolf with silver-tipped fur and eyes the color of something ancient. I'm sure, she said. She was not prepared for Kieran to find her that afternoon. She was in one of the summit building's smaller courtyard gardens, alone, deliberately alone, taking 20 minutes of quiet before the day continued. He came around the corner with the look of a man who had been tracking her for some time and was done waiting. Dex is working against you, he said. She looked at him. I know. He came without my authorization. I didn't know he'd left Ironmore. I know that too. Something shifted in his expression. You know a great deal. I've had years to learn. She turned back to the small fountain at the garden's center. What do you want, Kieran? I want to tell you that Ironmore stands with you. She looked at him over her shoulder. Ironmore's alpha stood on a cliff's edge 7 years ago and let his beta shove a girl into the dark. He closed his eyes briefly. I didn't know. You didn't know because you'd already walked away. Because after you said what you said, you left. And what happened after didn't concern you. She faced him fully. That is the thing about cruelty done in public, Kieran. It gives permission. You didn't push me. You just created the conditions in which pushing felt acceptable. He stood very still. He looked like a man being taken apart and having nothing to say in his own defense, which was the most honest thing she'd seen from him. I know, he said, again. That same quiet acknowledgement that he'd offered on the terrace. Why does Ironmore stand with me? She asked. Because of the Night Vale bloodline? Because I'm politically useful now? No, he said. Because I've been watching you for 3 days and I know. He stopped. I know you should have had better from me. From all of us. It wasn't enough. But it was something. She recognized the difference. I'll consider Ironmore's position, she said. That's all I'm offering. He nodded, turned to go. Kieran. He stopped. Is Dex acting alone? Or is there something more organized behind him? He turned back. His expression had hardened into something protective. Not of her, but of truth. There's a faction, he said carefully. Old Guard. Pack lords who were part of the families that originally signed the purge orders. They've been watching the archive situation develop for some time. They have reach. I don't fully know yet. Names? I can get you names. Do that, she said. And we'll call it even. He left. She stood in the garden a moment longer, listening to the fountain. The betrayal, nobody saw coming. Mira knocked on the garden gate 20 minutes later. Her face was the color of unset dough. Sarah, she said, I need to tell you something. About Lysander. Sophia felt the cold move through her before Mira spoke another word. He's been feeding information to Hale's people, Mira said. For months. Not everything. He's been genuinely on your side in many things. But the timing of certain moves, the schedule of the document filing, details about your wolf. I found it this morning. I went through his communication records. She held out a small device. A modern security record she'd pulled from the merchant house's system. He's been playing both sides. Sophia looked at the record. Read it. All of it. He's not working for Hale, she said slowly. What? Look at the end of this chain. The name he's reporting to isn't Hale. It's someone Hale doesn't know about either. She looked up. There's a third party. Someone who's been managing this situation from outside the summit entirely. Someone who knew about the archive long before Lysander came to me. She paused. Someone who sent him to find me specifically. Who? Mira whispered. Sophia looked at her mother's locket, thought of Thessaly, and her clouded eyes, and the warm stone pressed into her palm. The question isn't what she was running from, child. The question is, what she was carrying. Someone who knew my grandmother, she said quietly. Someone who's been waiting a very long time. She found Thessaly in Valethorn. This surprised her. The old woman's market stall was in Greyfen, 2 days' journey south. But when she followed the trail Mira had uncovered, it led here, to a small house in the old district, surrounded by cedar smoke and wind chimes, and absolute stillness. Thessaly answered the door before she knocked. I was wondering how long it would take you, the old woman said. You sent Lysander to find me. I arranged for Lysander to find you. Yes. Why? Why not come yourself? Because you weren't ready when I first met you in Greyfen. You needed to build yourself first. Thessaly stepped back. Come in. Inside, the house was full of things that were old enough to predate Sophia's understanding of history. Maps, records, artifacts that carried the deep warmth of lunar energy. The same warmth as the stone in her pocket. Because some of them were the same kind of stone. Many of them. On one wall, a painted portrait. An old painting, formal and stiff, of a woman in dark robes with silver at her collar, and eyes the color of violet. My grandmother, Sophia said. Queen Seraphil, your namesake. Thessaly sat in a high-backed chair and folded her hands. I was her handmaid. For 30 years, before the purge. I ran with your mother when she fled. I was the one who hid the archive. She paused. I gave you the stone the day I recognized your wolf's potential in your hands. You were still blocked, still running from your own power, but I knew what you were. Sophia sat across from her. You've been watching over me. From a distance, as your grandmother asked me to. Why not tell me sooner? Because a queen who is told her identity before she finds her own power becomes dependent on the telling. Thessaly met her eyes. You had to find it yourself. You did. Sophia was quiet for a moment. There's a faction, Old Guard. They knew about the bloodline? They suspected. The stone amplifies Night Veil power. I'd heard whispers over the years that a wolf with Night Veil traits had been seen in various cities. The faction began watching, but they didn't know for certain until Lysander filed the document. Lysander was reporting to them. To one of them, a woman who calls herself a neutral party. She is not neutral. She wants the Night Veil restored, but under her terms, under her guidance. She believes the bloodline should serve the existing power structures rather than reshape them. She wants a puppet queen. She wants stability, Thessaly said. She has confused stability with control, as the powerful often do. Sophia looked at her grandmother's portrait, at those violet eyes. Who is she? Thessaly told her. The name hit her like a stone to the chest. Lady Vera Ashvale. Kieran's grandmother. The full moon arrived on the 6th day of the summit. The lunar proof was scheduled for midnight, on the summit grounds' formal courtyard, a large stone-paved space, designed for exactly this kind of ceremony. Every delegate, every alpha, every advisor had been invited. The Council of Five sat in the formal seats. Lord Hale had arranged for 3 specialists to be present, credentialed experts in bloodline verification. Sophia arrived alone. No delegation, no security. Just herself, in black, with the stone warm in her closed fist. The crowd was enormous. She had expected that. What she hadn't expected was the quality of the silence when she walked in. Not the mocking quiet of Ironmore's awakening, but something else entirely. Something closer to reverence. Or at least, the beginning of it. She took her position at the center of the courtyard, looked up at the moon, full, enormous, the same bloody red color it had been on every important night of her life. And she let go. The shift came the way it always came for her, easily, like stepping through a door. One breath she was a woman in black silk, the next she was something else, enormous and dark and silver-edged, standing in the center of the courtyard with violet fire in her eyes. She heard the crowd react, a collective inhale, then a ripple of sound, not laughter, never again laughter. This was recognition, shock, awe. She stood very still, and let them look. Let the 3 specialists look. Let the moon fall on her wolf's fur, and illuminate every silver tip, every inch of her grandmother's lineage made flesh. Hale's specialists conferred. She waited. She was patient. She had been patient for years. Then one of them walked to the council's table and said, clearly and formally, "The wolf is definitively Night Vale. There is no ambiguity." And then she shifted back, dressed, standing, composed, as if she hadn't just silenced a room full of the most powerful wolves on the continent. She turned to face the crowd. She found Kieran first. He was standing at the edge of the formal seats, and his face was completely open, in a way she suspected it had not been in years, possibly ever. The moon goddess's bond, which he'd felt as an ache for 7 years, had just found its source confirmed, not just as his fated mate, but as a queen. She could see him calculating what that meant, recalculating again. She felt something toward him then, that she hadn't expected. Not love, not yet, but something adjacent to it. Understanding, maybe. Compassion for a man who had failed and was beginning to understand the scope of that failure. She turned away. There were other things to attend to tonight. The moment of apparent defeat, the one where viewers believe all hope is lost, came 40 minutes later. She had been expecting Hale's challenge. What she had not been expecting was the old law he invoked, an archaic provision of the Continental Charter, buried deep in the procedural appendices, that allowed any sitting member to call for a sovereignty trial in cases of disputed bloodline reinstatement. A sovereignty trial was not an argument. It was not a documentation review. It was, in essence, a combat ceremony. The bloodline claimant faced a chosen representative of the opposing party in formal combat, with the outcome determining the legal result. It was ancient. It was rarely invoked. It had not been used in over 100 years, and it was legally binding. Hale smiled as he read out the provision. He had prepared for this. He had chosen a champion, a massive alpha warrior from the Eastern Alliance named Goran, who was known across the continent as undefeated in formal combat. 7 feet of solid muscle and pack-bred fighting instinct, with a wolf that rivaled the size of young mountains. He smiled, because he thought he had won. A Nightvale queen, however powerful in theory, had been living as a merchant security director. She was no warrior. She looked at Goran. He looked back at her with professional detachment. Not contempt, simply the assessment of a man judging a task. The room was very quiet. Several things happened simultaneously. Darian Coldhaven stepped forward to formally object to the trial on procedural grounds. Buying time, she could see. Mira, somewhere in the crowd, made a small strangled sound. And Sophia thought of Bryn. Of 2 years of morning training in the rain. Of the way Bryn had made her start again and again and again, until the flinching stopped, until her hands were fast and her feet were faster. Of the nights she'd spent after training, sitting with Thessaly's stone, and the moon's current running through her hands. She thought of her mother, running for 30 years. She thought of Ironmore, and the cold, and the laughter. She said, clearly, in a voice that carried, "I accept." Darian turned to look at her. His expression was perfectly controlled, except for his eyes, which said, "What are you doing?" She looked back at him. "Trust me." He was still for a long moment, then he stepped back. The trial was held immediately. That was also part of the old law. No preparation, no delay. The courtyard was cleared. Moon goddess witnesses were formally invoked by the elders present. The rules were read aloud. Combat until one party yielded or was unable to continue. No weapons beyond natural wolf abilities. Goran shifted first. He was, as advertised, enormous. A wolf the color of iron, with a deep chest and the patient, controlled power of a fighter who had never lost. Sophia did not shift immediately. She stood in the center of the courtyard and turned the stone over in her hand, once, twice, 3 times, feeling the current, feeling the moon. Then she pressed the stone to her sternum, over her heart, and she did something she had never done before. She asked, "Not of the stone." Through the stone, the way Thessaly had tried to explain, the night veil were the moon goddess's hands, which meant the channel ran both directions. She had been practicing this for years. She had never pushed it to its limit. She pushed it now. The moonlight, which had been falling on the courtyard in its natural, diffuse way, shifted. Not dramatically, not like a celestial spotlight. Nothing showy. Just a subtle intensification. A deepening. The way sunlight deepens through glass. It settled on her wolf as she shifted, and the black fur caught it, and the silver tipped every hair, and the violet eyes burned with something that was not natural light. She felt the current, and she moved. The fight was not long. It was not, to the observers, what they had expected. They had expected her to be overpowered immediately. Instead, what they saw was a wolf who fought the way water fought, not through force, but through direction, through flow, finding the spaces between Goran's strength rather than attempting to match it. He was bigger. He was, on pure power, stronger, but strength without direction was just mass. She had trained 2 years in the rain, with a woman who had no patience for strength used without precision. The critical moment came when Goran committed to a full charge that would have ended most fights. She sidestepped, not back, not away, but to the outside of his line, using his momentum to pivot, and the stone's current moved through her paws and into the ground, and the moonlight intensified for one brilliant second, and Goran's charge carried him past her and into the courtyard's stone wall. He lay still for a moment. Then he rose, shook himself, and in the formal language of the old combat law, lowered his head. Yield. The sound that went through the crowd was not applause exactly. It was the sound of a collective story being rewritten. She shifted back, stood. The stone was cool now in her hand, cool and satisfied, like a thing that had done its work. She looked at Hale. His face was the color of ash. She looked at the council. 3 of the 5 were trying not to smile. She looked at Kieran. He had his hand over his mouth. His eyes were bright. She looked away. The reckoning took the next 2 days. With the sovereignty trial resolved and the Night Vale seat formally confirmed, the provisional bloc of 3 alliances began the process of formally acknowledging the old purge as unlawful. A process that was largely administrative, but carried significant symbolic weight. Pack historians would argue about the implications for years. Dex Harmon was formally censured by the council for his undisclosed lobbying activities. He did not go quietly, which created a scene in one of the summit's formal corridors that most delegates witnessed and all delegates remembered. When Sophia walked past him in the aftermath, he was being escorted from the building by council security. He looked at her with naked fury. "You were nothing," he said. "You were nothing when I pushed you off that ledge, and you're still nothing." She stopped, looked at him with the calm attention of someone considering a very uninteresting object. "7 years ago," she said, "you pushed a girl off a cliff in the dark because an alpha's contempt gave you permission. Tonight, that same girl is a council member, a documented queen, and the reason your alpha is reconsidering every choice he's made since the age of 18. She tilted her head slightly. "Tell me more about nothing." She walked on. Lady Vera Ashvale, Kieran's grandmother, the woman who had been managing Lysander, met with her privately on the second day of the reckoning. She was in her 70s, silver-haired, with the upright bearing of someone who had wielded power for decades and considered it a natural state. "I owe you an explanation," Vera said. "You owe me several things," Sophia said. "An explanation is the smallest." Vera's expression acknowledged this. "When I was young, I knew your grandmother. We were not friends. Night Vale and Ashvale were rival houses, historically, but I respected her. When the purge came, I could not stop it. I was not powerful enough, and the coalition was too large." She paused. "I have carried that failure for 50 years. When the archive materials began surfacing, I saw an opportunity to act. I chose the wrong method. You tried to control instead of support." "Yes." "Why Lysander? Why not approach me directly?" "Because I didn't know who you were yet. Not personally. I needed to know what you had become before I decided." She stopped. "Before you decided whether to use me or help me," Sophia said. Vera was quiet for a moment. "I want to make a formal apology, on behalf of the Ashvale line. Not for Kieran. He owes you his own. But for my family's role in the Purge Coalition, and for my handling of your emergence." Sophia looked at her for a long moment. "I'll hear it," she said, "officially, in the council record." Vera nodded. "As you wish." "And the Ashvale line's support for the Night Vale reinstatement, also in the record." Another nod. Also as you wish. Good. She stood. We are not friends, Lady Ashvale, but we don't need to be enemies. Vera looked at her with something that was almost, not quite, admiration. Your grandmother would have liked you, she said. I hope so, Sophia said. I have a great deal to live up to. She found Kieran at dawn on the third day. He was where she had somehow known he would be, on the observation terrace, where they'd first spoken properly, looking out over Valethorn's waking skyline. He was in a plain gray coat, no rank markings, no formal regalia, just a man in the early light. She stood beside him. They were quiet for a long time. The city below was moving. Market carts, early walkers, the sound of bells from somewhere distant. My grandmother told me what she did, he said finally. I know. I didn't. He stopped, tried again. I didn't know about the night veil, about your mother, about any of it, but I want you to know that. Another stop. That none of that is why I'm here. Why are you here? He turned to face her. Because I have spent 7 years feeling the shape of something I destroyed, and not knowing how to say that out loud. Because I was 18, and I was terrible, and I have tried to become something better than that, but I don't know if I have. Because, he exhaled, because you are the most extraordinary person I have ever seen in my life, and I have absolutely no right to tell you that. She was quiet for a moment. No, she said, you don't. He nodded. I know. The bond is still there, she said. I feel it. I expect I always will. Yes. That doesn't mean I owe you anything. I know that too. But, she said, and he went very still, the moon goddess didn't choose us without reason. Whatever reason that was isn't visible to me yet, and I am not the kind of woman who ignores data. She turned to look at him. I am not forgiving you today. I may not forgive you for a long time. Do you understand the difference between forgiveness and a second chance? He looked at her carefully. Tell me. Forgiveness is something I give myself, eventually, to stop carrying the weight. A second chance is something I give you, conditionally, if you earn it. They are separate things. She held his gaze. I am willing to consider whether you can earn it. That is all I am offering. He was very still. Then he said, quietly, that's more than I deserve. Yes, she said, it is. She turned back to the skyline. Don't waste it. The shocking reveal arrived not from any enemy or political rival, but from Thessaly, on the last evening of the summit. The old woman came to her rooms with a box, small, cedar wood, sealed with a lock in the shape of a crescent moon. Your grandmother left this, Thessaly said, to be given to the heir when she was ready. I have been waiting for you to be ready. Inside the box was a crown. Not an ostentatious thing, not jeweled or enormous, but a simple circlet of dark metal, engraved with the symbols Sophia had come to recognize as the Night Veil language. And beside it, a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it. The handwriting was not her mother's. It was older, more formal, and it began, To my blood's blood, whom I will never meet. She sat and read her grandmother's letter, all of it. It took a long time. Queen Seraphiel had written it the night before the purge, knowing she would not survive, knowing her daughter would run. She had written what she hoped for her bloodline, what she believed the Night Veil were for, what the moon goddess had told her in her last lunar communion. She had written about the power, that it wasn't meant for conquest or domination, but for healing. The Night Veil's deep lunar connection was meant to mend the fractures in the pack world, to serve as a bridge between competing powers. to bring the kind of lasting peace that pure political agreement couldn't achieve. She had also written about the mate bond. The moon goddess's matches are not punishments or accidents. They are assignments. The bond is given to the person who will make you choose, who will force you to discover whether your strength is real or only tested in comfortable conditions. Sometimes our matched one is a gift. Sometimes they are a fire. Do not mistake fire for ruin. Sometimes we need burning to understand what we're made of. Sophia sat with the letter for a long time. Then she held the crown in her hands. It was warm. Of course it was warm. She set it back in the box, carefully. She was not ready to wear it yet, but she was closer. The last day of the summit was the closing ceremony. Formal resolutions, ratified agreements, the public record of what had been decided. The Ashevale territorial proposal was passed. With modifications, Sophia helped draft, over 2 late nights with Darian and 2 other Alpha delegates. The Night Vale seat was formally established in the Council of Six. The historical acknowledgement of the purge's illegality was entered into the Continental Record. She stood at the front of the council chamber for the reading of the formal resolutions, in black with silver at her collar, with her mother's locket at her throat. The chamber was full. Every delegate, every alpha, every advisor. More people than the room should technically hold, pressed into doorways and standing along walls. When the chair read out the Night Vale resolution and looked to her for formal acknowledgement, she stood. On behalf of the Night Vale bloodline, she said, I accept the restoration of our seat and our sovereignty. I do not accept it as a trophy. I accept it as a responsibility. The Night Vale were created to serve the balance of this world, not to dominate it. That is what we will do. She looked at the room, at every face. The purge was a decision made from fear, she said. Fear of power that couldn't be controlled. I want to say plainly, I have no interest in being controlled, and I have no interest in controlling any of you. What I am interested in is building something that lasts longer than any one alpha's ambition or any one council's political convenience. She paused. If you are interested in that too, I am here. She sat down. The room was quiet. Then, from the side of the chamber, a single person stood and began to clap. Not in that slow, formal alpha signaling way. Just genuine, immediate, like someone who simply couldn't help it. Mira. She had ink on her fingers. She was grinning so hard her eyes were almost closed. And one by one, the room followed. Afterward, there was a reception. The kind that follows historic moments, relieved, slightly giddy, full of conversations that were really the beginning of entirely different negotiations. Sophia moved through it, with a lightness she hadn't expected. Greeting people she genuinely wanted to know, and deflecting the ones who were already calculating what kind of access her new position could provide. Darian found her on the edges of the room. You said no interest in controlling any of you, he said. Half the alphas in that room looked personally addressed. They were. He smiled. Sarah. It was the first time he'd used the shortened name. Only Mira used it. Only people who actually knew her. She noted this. Yes, she said. Whatever you're building, he said, I want to be part of it, not as a political ally, not as PAC support. He held her gaze. You know what I mean. She did. She thought about it for a moment, really thought about it, the way she thought about everything now, with full attention and appropriate caution. Ask me again in 6 months, she said. He absorbed this. 6 months. "You deserve more consideration than a summit reception," she said. "And I deserve more than a decision made in the middle of a historic week." He nodded. 6 months, he agreed. "I'll be patient." "I know," she said. "That's one of the things in your favor." She moved on. There were more people to see. The world she was building did not wait. The aftermath was not a single moment, but a season. She stayed in Valethorn through the winter, working with the new Council of Six to establish the Night Vale seat's procedural role. She negotiated the terms of the Ashvale Highland custodianship with the 3 alliance leaders. She began the process of locating the Night Vale Kingdom's physical territory. It existed, the archive documents made clear, in a stretch of land in the northern reaches that had been officially classified as unclaimed wilderness for 2 centuries. It was not unclaimed. It was waiting. Mira began the project of rebuilding the Night Vale Knowledge Archive, cataloging, cross-referencing, translating the old texts. She had found her life's work, and she attacked it with the energy of someone who had always known exactly what they were for, and had just been handed the tools. Thessaly moved to Valethorn properly. She occupied a house 3 streets from Sophia's, and held what she called office hours, during which wolves from across the continent came to ask questions about the old lore that she seemed to have memorized entirely. She refused a formal advisory title. She was, she said, a handmaid. She intended to stay that way. Kieran returned to Ironmore. He sent a formal letter acknowledging Ironmore's support for the Night Vale reinstatement, and a private one that said only, "I am trying. I thought you should know." See. She filed the formal letter. She kept the private one. Betadex Harmon was removed from his position by Kieran's Pack Council in a process that involved rather more drama than Sophia had expected. The reasons were complex. Dex had, it emerged, been entangled in several of Lord Hale's schemes, beyond just the summit lobbying, but the outcome was clean. He left Ironmore. She thought of him occasionally, not with anger, but with a kind of distant recognition, of a man who had let someone else's contempt become the permission slip for his own worst impulses. She hoped, without conviction, that he found something better than what he'd been. Lord Hale's political influence contracted sharply in the summit's aftermath. The document bind, the old contract acknowledging the purge's illegality, had implicated enough of his alliance's founding families to keep him occupied with his own counsel for the foreseeable future. On the night of the winter solstice, 3 months after the summit, Sophia sat alone in the house she now rented permanently in Valethorn's old district. The house was larger than she'd needed. She'd chosen it for the garden, which had a fountain and a good view of the sky, and she had filled it slowly with things that were hers. Not charity, not borrowed. Hers. She sat with her grandmother's letter in her hands, and Thessaly's stone warm in her pocket, and her mother's locket at her throat. And she thought about what she was building, and who she was becoming, and how strange it was to have arrived here from a ledge in the dark. She was 25 years old. She had been rejected, humiliated, exiled, tested, nearly destroyed, and completely remade. She was a queen without a court, a woman without a definitive answer about her fated mate, a bloodline without a physical kingdom yet, building one stone by stone in the gap between what had been lost and what could be recovered. She was the most powerful wolf in a room that hadn't existed when she was born. She was, she thought, finally beginning. 6 months later, she was in the new Night Vale seat office, a set of rooms in the council building she had furnished with Mira's help. when Darian knocked. She looked up. He was in a plain coat, off-duty, with the particular bearing of a man who has been patient for exactly as long as he said he would be. 6 months, he said. 6 months, she agreed. May I come in? She looked at him, this man who had been steady and smart and consistently surprising, who had never leaned on his authority or his alpha status, who had stood in a summit chamber and clapped first without calculation. Yes, she said. Sit down. He sat. She closed the document she'd been working on and gave him her full attention. I want you to know, he said, that this is not a political ask. Whatever you decide, Greywing's support for the Night Vale is unconditional. I know, she said. That's also in your favor. He waited. She looked at him for a moment. Let herself actually feel the thing she'd been carefully not feeling for the better part of a year. The warmth of genuine connection, of choosing someone because they'd earned it, rather than because a bond demanded it. This was different from what she felt with Kieran. The Kieran thing was ancient and cosmic, and still unresolved, like a storm she hadn't yet decided to walk into. This was quieter, more deliberate, more chosen. Here is what I know, she said. I am not finished with the question of my fated mate. I can't promise you that I ever will be. The bond is real, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I know, he said. I've known for a long time. And you still? I still, he said simply. She was quiet for a moment. Then I would like to find out what we are. Slowly, carefully, without any of us making promises we can't keep. He smiled, that genuine, surprised smile she'd first seen in the corridor at the Commerce Council, when she'd corrected the count of her own words. I can do slow and careful, he said. I've been practicing for 6 months. She laughed. Genuinely, unexpectedly. He looked at her, the way people looked at something they'd been hoping to see for a long time. Good, she said. And Kieran? He came to Valethorn in the spring. Not for the council, not for politics. He sent a message first. Formal, careful, asking for a meeting at her convenience. She set a date. He arrived on time in a plain coat, without his delegation. They walked in the garden near the council building. The fountain was running. The early spring air smelled like green things beginning. He had spent the months doing what he said he would. She could see it, in the way he carried himself. Slightly less armored than he'd been. Slightly more honest. Not transformed. People were not transformed so easily, nor should they be. But moving. I've been thinking about what you said, he told her, about the difference between forgiveness and a second chance. And? I don't think I'm asking for either yet, he said. I think I'm just asking if I can keep. He paused. Showing up, being in the same room, being part of whatever you're building, if you'll have Ironmore. As a political ally, she said. For now, he said. Only for now. But yes. She considered him. The bond between them was present and patient and old. Older than either of them. Older than the hurt he'd caused. Older than anything that had happened between a cliff's edge and a council chamber. Yes, she said. Ironmore is welcome. He exhaled slowly. Thank you. Don't thank me, she said. Just be useful. He smiled. A small, somewhat self-deprecating smile she'd never seen on him before. It suited him better than the cold, magnificent one had. I can do that, he said. They walked to the fountain. She turned the stone over in her hands. He watched her do it with the expression of a man learning to see something properly for the first time. "What is that?" he asked. "A connection," she said, "to something much older and bigger than either of us." She looked at the moon in the daytime sky, pale and present. "The moon goddess is patient," she said. "I'm learning that from her." He was quiet for a moment. "Is there," he started, "is there any chance, eventually, that I—" "Ask me in a year," she said. He blinked, then something settled in his face. Not disappointment, but understanding. The understanding of a man who knows what it means to be given a chance he doesn't yet deserve, and is being offered the time to deserve it. "A year," he said. "Earn it," she said. "Not with words, with who you become." She turned away from the fountain and walked back toward the council building. There were meetings to attend, documents to review, a kingdom to build from the ground up, allies to cultivate, and enemies to outlast, and a grandmother's legacy to honor. She was 25 years old. She was just beginning. Behind her, she heard him stand a moment longer at the fountain before following. Not chasing, not pressing, just following, at a respectful distance, into the future she was building, with or without him. The stone was warm in her hand. The moon was pale in the spring sky. And somewhere in the deep quiet between heartbeats, the moon goddess, patient, enormous, endlessly watching, smiled. The girl they called nothing built something they could not ignore. The queen they tried to erase wrote herself into history. The wound that began on a cliff in the dark became the foundation of a kingdom built in the light. She did not need their worship, but she had certainly earned it. If you were Sophia, would you have ever given Kieran a second chance? Did he earn it by the end? Or does some rejection cut too deep to come back from? And let us know, Team Darian or Team Kieran? Drop your answer below. We want to know where you stand. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The next story drops soon.